This is Real Estate This Week with Stephen Gasque. 17 years on air and online, helping you succeed in buying, selling, and investing in property. The best real estate strategies out there, just for you.
Welcome to Real Estate This Week. Hi again, I'm Stephen Gasque, and I'm delighted you're with us today because we're looking at a potentially life-saving topic as summer begins. How to make your house survive the absolute worst natural disasters, hurricanes, tornadoes, floods, and more. Our guest today is George Siegal, who created a film explaining how homes can be tougher, stronger, and take the worst hits possible, but still stay standing. It's called Built to Last, Buyer Beware, produced by George's company, Move the World Films. George, welcome to Real Estate This Week.
Hey, thank you so much for having me.
I am so glad you're here. And George, I have to tell you, you are the first film director I have ever had on the show. And I want to ask you, first of all, about your company, which is Move the World Films. Tell us about that.
You know, it's funny how I came up with that because my dad used to have this expression that he would always tell me growing up about Archimedes. And he would say, if you give me a lever big enough, I could move the world. And so I thought about that. And that's actually the animated logo for my production company with two people cranking on this big lever. And they move the world just a little bit. And that's the kind of the theme I like to throw into my films. If I could just move the world a little bit and get some people's attention, then I'll have done a good job. So that's how that all came about.
That is awesome. And I'd like to talk to you about one film in particular called Built to Last, Buyer Beware, about building homes that can withstand violent storms and possibly buying a home that hopefully could also withstand the worst storms out there. First of all, what was the inspiration for your film called Built to Last, Buyer Beware?
I think it was life experience and all the places I've lived and the stories I covered when I was in the news business, seeing every year houses were getting wiped out. And it was the same story, different disaster in every location. You know, some places it's a hurricane, some places it's a flood, it's a tornado, it's a fire. But the victims all have to start over. Their lives are ruined. And I said, how many people really understand if their house is built to last? Because that's not the questions we ask when we go house hunting. We don't ask the tough questions about how the structure was built. We ask the questions about, oh, tell me about those countertops. Is it near a good school? Where can my kids play and run around? And those are the easy things to figure out. The tough part is how that house was built, and was it built to last? And the answer in most cases is it was not, and that's why we say buyer beware.
This is so interesting, George, because many people, when they think about building a safe house that can withstand storms, they think of hurricanes, they think of tornadoes, they think of maybe severe blizzards. But really, this advice that we're about to talk about applies to every home, everywhere.
Yeah, it really does. Every place you live could have some kind of peril going on that could trigger some kind of problem. And that's what we really try to encourage through the film, is for people to investigate that and be a step ahead of that. You know, there's a word that I hate more than anything, and that's when a builder goes, this house was built to code. Because code is like a moving target. You know, code is based on data from the past, not projections for the future. So what you want to hear from a builder is, I exceeded the code because I'm thinking of tomorrow. I'm not a rebuilder, I'm a builder. And I want this house to be around in 30 or 40 years. I don't want it to have to be torn down in 5 years when it gets hit by something. And that's really the key, is to find that house that is your forever home that is built to last.
And so you put together a really wonderful list of questions that every buyer should ask, either the builder or the seller. And let's run down that list now, beginning with, can you tell me of all the natural disasters and dangers that you took into consideration when building this home? That's question number one.
Yeah, that's a great question to ask, and I'd love to see the face of the person you ask it to, because when I've gone to open houses, the agent there doesn't know. They don't have the answer to that, and that's a tough question. I think most builders, if I came through and they were the ones giving the tour, they'd probably say, "Hey, thanks for coming by, but we're going to sell to somebody else," because I would ask them so many questions, and that's an important one. And an example is I live in Tampa, Florida. And there are houses in my neighborhood that are being built with wood on the first and second floor. Most houses have wood on the second floor. And some builders will tell you, yeah, but we have it made very strong. And we're using this technique that allows it to withstand, as the code says, up to 140 mile an hour winds. Well, we could easily get a Category 5 hurricane here, or certainly a Category 4. The house wouldn't survive that in all likelihood. That's not going to be safe. But that's with the "it's not going to happen to us" mentality. And they don't seem concerned about something that would concern the heck out of me. And so I think that's important. I want to know, in South Florida, they have a standard that every house has to be built to withstand a Category 5 hurricane. Well, all of Florida can get hit with hurricanes. I think that should be the standard. And then you move up the East Coast, where our hurricane ends up being somebody else's problem. Look at what happened in North Carolina. How prepared are they? In that instance, clearly they never would have imagined preparing for what happened to them. But it just shows you have to be as prepared as possible for what could come your way.
And so for every potential buyer, you recommend they ask question number 2 also. Exactly how is this house built to withstand potential hazards? Tell us about that.
Yeah. Well, that could be as simple as them telling you that it's concrete block on both floors. That could be as simple as saying we use special hurricane brackets to attach the roof to the walls, and we strap the walls to the foundation. How have they anchored this house? If you're in a fire area, how did they build that house to withstand embers that could blow by in a firestorm? How did they plan the yard around that to have a defensible space so things aren't right up against the house? What's the roof made of? How quickly would that burn? Those are questions you absolutely would want to hear them explain. Yeah, we thought about this, and this is how we did it. If you're moving into a neighborhood in the woods, how many exits are there out of that neighborhood? How did they design evacuations? If everybody had to leave at the same time, how would they get out? We saw in Paradise, California, that doesn't end well when people have to flee and there's one way out. It's not a good ending to any situation. And then you have areas where there's tornadoes and the garage isn't strong, so the whole house can blow down. You have places that have heat and drought, and the foundations aren't cured properly because the ground wasn't treated properly before they built the house, and then you have cracking and compromising of the foundation. So that's a very important question for them to answer. These are the things I considered, and this is what I did about it.
Yes, this is what I did about it. But one of your other questions is not just what did you do, but also who verified that what you did will protect this house in a violent storm. Tell us about that.
Yeah, it's a huge leap of faith to take somebody as being straight with you. I don't have a lot of faith in that's going to sound terrible, but I don't know that people are always going to be completely transparent about that. And I've had it happen with things that pop up in every house I've ever owned, where the questions I didn't ask are the ones I wish I had because I didn't get what I thought I was buying. And so if you don't say who verified it, how do you know they even did it right? How do you know that it was truly built to that? Because an inspector can't flag everything as they're walking through. Once the drywall's up, there's things behind the walls that they'll never see. So they don't know if everything is bracketed down properly and attached properly unless you have inspections along the way during the build. And if you're buying an older house, you certainly don't have that kind of access. So those are questions that you want to know. Did somebody sign off on it? Is there an engineer's report or a test that they did that showed that it passed the inspection, that it meets the standard that they're telling you it is built to?
And that leads to the next question. Can you prove these assurances? And if so, how can you prove them?
Yeah, that's kind of a run-on from the previous question, if somebody verified it, because that's all part of proving it. And, a lot of things you don't know until the disaster hits how it's truly tested, how it's truly built. Because construction, I'm sure as you know and your listeners know, it's not a perfect world. There's going to be problems. but it's how many problems did this particular builder have, and then how do they address them when they've had those problems. So you can do your research and try to find other houses that aren't necessarily on the reference list that they give you, but other houses that they built, and talk to the people that live in them. And what has their experience been like? What have they gone through? Now, the chances are they've, hopefully haven't gone through a major disaster to have it tested to that extent, but you never know. They would tell you if, our walls are creaking, there's a lot of settling, the builder never answers our calls, it takes forever to get somebody out here to fix anything. There's a lot of answers that you could get by just doing a little work and talking to people. And I think that's an important thing to do.
That's really important. And it really could save the house and save lives. And another question you suggest, George, is looking at the weather history around that house. Has it ever flooded before? Has it ever been through a tornado? Has it ever been through a hurricane? And if so, what happened?
Yeah, there's what we saw in our film, and it could have changed because it was a couple of years ago when we finished shooting, is there were 17 states in this country that did not require flood disclosure. And so a house could have had a flood or water problems, and they didn't have to tell the person buying the house. They didn't have to disclose anything. And so what I always encourage people is, even if there is a disclosure law, put it in writing in your offer. Has this house ever flooded before? If so, what happened? Because at least you're making them responsible for at least giving you the accurate history of the house. And I think that's an important question to ask, even if they have to check a box and say, yeah, and maybe they have to do some explaining on it. I like to dig a little deeper and know what happened. Can you get flood insurance for this house at a reasonable cost? And that would mean that the code has to be current to the extent that the flood insurance, if you're not in a house, like for example in my neighborhood, that's elevated over 10 feet, flood insurance is way more expensive than if you're elevated. So if you have a ground level house, you're going to pay a lot more to have flood insurance. So you want to know to what standard that was built, and are you eligible to get it? And you really should find that out before you become the owner, because that can be a major problem.
Now, you just mentioned cost, and that, in fact, is also one of your questions. You recommend asking a home builder, how much more would it cost to build the house to withstand potential disasters? Tell us about that, George.
Sometimes that's a tough question to get answered by a builder, because they're not very transparent with this number. And believe me, I've asked a lot of times, like, if you built that house that I see down the street and put concrete on the second floor, how much is it going to cost? And in a lot of cases, if they designed a plan that didn't support the weight on the second floor, then you really can't put concrete there, because concrete is heavy. If you're going to do that, it has to be engineered a certain way. But, it could be 10% more, 15% more. It really depends on at what point you come in and make that decision. And I think it needs to be from the design stage. But I think it's worth it, because what I say to people is, look at what the cost is of not doing that. And that should be the most incredible calculation that I wish somebody would put together and market, is here's what it costs to build this, and here's what happens and what the cost is if you don't. 5 years of being displaced from your house, 5 years of paying a mortgage on a house you can't live in, 5 years of fighting your insurance company because they don't want to honor your claim and pay you the full value of what you're owed. 5 years of driving your kids an extra 20 miles to school because you didn't want to disrupt their lives. There are so many costs that aren't calculated with dollars and cents. So if you could calculate a safer house into your mortgage, first of all, I think you'll get that money back when you sell it. And secondly, you won't be living a disaster victim's life for 5 to 10 years of your life. And you won't possibly end up having everything destroyed and ruined that you care about. So it's a calculation that, doing it the right way, I really think is priceless. Because when I see people and the problems that they have when things go south, it's horrible.
Well, George, let's take every one of your questions and roll them into one big question. If I were to build a house in an area known for hurricanes, or if I were to build a house in an area known for tornadoes, what would be in that house and how would it be constructed so I and my family would remain safe?
Well, first off, I'm a big advocate of concrete block houses. I think that's very important. If I was in a hurricane area, I would want also to know the flooding factor and where the water could come at. And even if you're in a tornado area, you want to know anywhere you live can flood. The former head of FEMA, the director, Brock Long, gave me this quote. He said, if it rains where you live, your house can flood. So the street can back up and flood your house. There could be a dam a mile upriver from you or upstream from where your house is. They could be building an apartment complex where a green space used to exist, and now your lot gets all the water when it rains heavily. So you really want to calculate all those factors. But I think if you do concrete block in a house that, this is a really quick story, but it's interesting. In Moore, Oklahoma, where we went for my film, The Last House Standing, they had 8 major tornadoes before they changed the building code. And they finally strengthened the code where if a major tornado hits you with a bullseye, there's probably nothing that's going to save your house. Then you better have a storm cellar, and you better not be in that house. That's just a horrible day for you. But if the storm is a quarter of a mile to your left or a quarter of a mile to your right, those houses were still getting badly damaged. So what they did is they changed the building code, so you had to put in a tougher garage door, so the garage door wouldn't be compromised in a storm. You had to do some things with bracketing the walls to the roof. And they found that they were saving a lot of houses by doing this that were getting destroyed previously. And I was interviewing a builder, and I said, how much did this cost to make this change? And he goes, roughly the cost of adding granite countertops to a house. And I said, and what would happen if people still had the choice? And he goes, they would probably choose the granite countertops. So I was stunned to hear that, because it's like, wow, for the cost of granite countertops, which is $3,000-$4,000, I guess, depending on the granite you choose, you could have a house that doesn't get blown over by a tornado. Sign me up. I'll pay that all day. But people wouldn't. People, if you told me, or not me, because I'm really paranoid about this stuff, but if you told somebody, look, you could get that Mercedes for $15,000 less without the airbags and the steel cage and the seat belts and the crash protection stuff in it, there's people that would take that deal just to have the car.
Interesting. And so, George, let's take another look at that question. If you were to have a house built for you and your family, starting at the foundation and going all the way to the top of the roof, what would that house be like if it was designed to withstand violent weather?
It would be like a maximum security prison, because those are actually the best built structures in the country, because they don't want those to get destroyed in a storm. In fact, in my film, The Last House Standing, a gentleman in there, my film partner, Eris, said you'd actually be safer in jail in some areas than you would be in the house that you live in because of what could happen. I would want a house that's elevated above the flood level for that area. I would want concrete block with either concrete tiles or a metal roof that's bracketed and fastened properly onto that structure. I would want closed cell insulation in my attic, so if moisture does penetrate the roof, it doesn't get through to the house. And I would try to make that a fortress. And then the number one thing after that I would do is make sure that there was a really good engineering plan for how I would heat and cool that house. Because what I've learned with experience is most builders, that's where they save money. They underton the air conditioning in a house, and they might not put enough return airs in. They might not put big enough ducts in the walls or up in the ceiling. And you really get one shot at that unless you want to go through and rip all that stuff out. And so you want to ask to see the air conditioning engineer's report of explaining why they put that size air conditioning in and how that's adequate. Because that's a problem that's very hard to fix.
Okay, so you have a house built as you just described, but a couple of things we didn't talk about. What about the doors? What about the windows? And what about the bushes and trees surrounding the house?
Well, as we learned, it's interesting. I grew up in Pacific Palisades, and we all saw what happened with the fire there. We never would have thought a fire would have wiped out the town like that. And most houses, and you'll see it if you look at construction or people's landscaping now, they put trees right up against the house. Especially in Florida, palm trees right up against the house. You want to have a good space between the tall vegetation and your house. So if there are embers, if there is a fire, that can't get into where you live. That's a very important thing that most people don't really think about. As far as windows, if you're in Florida, obviously you want hurricane strength windows, and depending on what it costs where you live, you want the highest strength windows that you can possibly get put in your house. And then one thing that I saw when we first moved to Florida, and I thought it was really stupid when I first saw it, we went to somebody's front door and the door opened out. And I go, wow, how unwelcoming is that? What idiots to build that? And then I learned that that's the safest door you can have, because a door that opens out, it's not going to blow in. So wind is not going to blow that door in. So if I was doing construction again, I would have my front doors open out.
What a great point. Wonderful point, George.
Yeah, you'll notice on your patio in the backyard, a door from your garage, most of those doors open out. And I don't know if it's for that reason or because they don't want to mess up your furniture plan inside the house, but most front doors open in. And if you have a double door, that's a lot easier to blow in than a single door. So you really want to make sure that gets anchored, because if in any kind of wind event that door gets blown in, you're going to have some problems.
And another couple of questions about common parts of every home. What about the big sliding glass doors? Do they make those that are hurricane proof, or do you still have to cover those with big sheets of plywood?
You know, that's a good question, and I don't fully know the answer to that because I didn't have any of those in my house, but I see them in a lot of apartments, or you see them in a lot of condos. So I know they can be hurricane strength. What I've seen with a lot of those doors that people have trouble with is water getting underneath when the rain is blowing sideways. But I don't know that those blow in that easily if they're installed properly. But I know they can be coated pretty high and pretty safe. You know, the problem with large windows like that, if they're unprotected, it's not so much of it blowing in, it's something blowing into it and breaking it. But they're supposed to be shatterproof. They're supposed to be built in a way that they wouldn't they would take the impact but not shatter all over the place.
Interesting.
And that's really one of the problems that happens in a major storm. Sometimes you could do everything right, but somebody else's house lands on you, or their tree lands on you, or a 2x4. When I went to Moore, Oklahoma after a tornado I was covering, there was a church, and there was a 2x4 that was blown into the concrete on the side of the church. So it was impaled in the concrete of the church. And you have to imagine in your mind, how fast did that have to be going to cleanly impale in a concrete building? Now, that's the problem with wood. If that had been a wood building, that would have been inside the church.
Right.
That would have been inside the house or wherever it is. So concrete at least slowed it down. Wood would not.
And so, George, also, what about people listening to this who might live in hurricane-prone areas who already have a house? What can they do to give them the best possible chance that the house will survive in a violent storm?
Well, there are programs in different areas that are home hardening programs where you can actually get money from the government or a loan or low interest loan, where you can take steps to possibly put in better windows for your house. Maybe you can get a new roof that's got a better impact rating for blowing off, that's fastened better. Maybe you can upgrade your front door, clear the vegetation and the brush around you that could blow into you in a storm. There's flood panels you could get. If you have a flood elevation house, you can try to keep the water out by putting flood panels on the openings to the house. Do you have a vent? Is your garage vented properly? Because a lot of times water presses up against the garage, which isn't as reinforced as the rest of the house, and that can make the whole house compromised if the garage breaks. So there are called flood vents that you can have that allow the water to flow in and allow the water to flow back out. Now, unfortunately, you lose the contents of the garage, but you save your house. So there's experts that can come through and give you a walkthrough of what do you need to do to make this house safer and how much would it cost. And then it's a cost analysis opportunity for you to go, okay, what would it cost me to move someplace safer? Or what would it cost me to make this place safer? Ultimately, your last gasp resort is making sure that you understand your insurance policy and that it's providing you the kind of coverage that you think you might need.
Finally, one last question. For everyone who's heard our interview, tell me, how can they see the film Built to Last, Buyer Beware?
They can rent the film online. That's one thing they can do. They can also check with our website, builttolastmovie.com. It's on PBS stations that it pops up around the country in different markets. on public television. The challenge is the timing of that and when they run it. I don't have knowledge of it until it's posted, and then I try to update the website. And I hope people take advantage of it, because if we can get people to just think in terms of making better decisions and making smart, informed decisions, I think a lot of people will avoid a lot of problems. And that's the goal of why we made this film.
Well, George, I really appreciate you being on the show today and sharing with us such important information about how to do the best job you can to make your house withstand the worst possible weather. George, thank you.
Thank you so much for having me, and I hope everybody will check out the film.
Sounds great. Thank you, George. George Siegal, filmmaker and producer of Built to Last, Buyer Beware, produced by Move the World Films. You can learn more and rent the film at movetheworldfilms.org. Next time on Real Estate This Week, more top real estate experts share their knowledge with you as the summer of 2026 continues. It's one hot market, and we'll have red hot advice. That's next on Real Estate This Week. And until then, I'm Stephen Gasque, and thank you for listening.
A brand new episode of Real Estate This Week with Stephen Gasque drops every weekend, everywhere. And you're invited to listen, subscribe, and follow us. Just look for Real Estate This Week with Stephen Gasque. The best real estate strategies out there, just for you.